Today we are going to study about transportation in human beings. In human beings, various substances like digested food, hormones, oxygen and excretory products are to be transported to the relevant organs. And the two most important carriers in our body are blood and lymph. Blood flows inside the closed vessel known as blood vessels. And to maintain the flow of blood inside this blood vessel, a pump is required, and heart is the pump of our body. So the heart, the blood vessels, blood and lymph together constitute the circulatory system of the human beings. Now we will study about them one by one. So first let's study about the blood vessels. Blood of human beings flows inside the closed tube known as blood vessels. Blood vessels are of three types: arteries, veins and capillaries. Now first we will study about the arteries. Arteries are those blood vessels which carry blood away from the heart. Mainly they carry the oxygenated or pure blood except pulmonary artery which carries impure blood to lungs. Arteries have thick wall and the walls are non-collapsible. As the walls of the arteries are thick, so the pressure of the blood inside the artery is very high. The lumen of the artery is narrow. There are no valves in the arteries. Next blood vessel is the veins. Veins are those blood vessels which carries blood to the heart. Veins mainly carry the impure or deoxygenated blood except pulmonary veins which brings oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. The walls of the veins are thinner and they are flexible. The walls of the veins are collapsible and the veins have valves. As the walls of the veins are thinner, so the pressure of the blood inside the veins is quite normal than that at artery. The third blood vessels are known as capillaries. Capillaries have very thin wall and they are the network of the blood vessels and helps in exchange of the gases between the tissues and the blood vessels. Now we will study the major difference between artery and vein. Artery carries pure blood except pulmonary artery which carries impure blood to lungs. Veins carries impure blood except pulmonary veins which brings pure blood from lungs to heart. Artery carries blood away from the heart and veins carry blood towards the heart. The walls of the arteries are very thick and so they are non-collapsible, whereas the walls of the veins are thinner, flexible and so they are collapsible. Valves are absent in arteries whereas valves are present in veins. The pressure of the blood inside the artery is quite high, whereas the pressure of the blood in the vein is normal. The lumen of the artery is narrow, whereas the lumen of the vein is wider. Arteries are situated deeply into the body tissues, whereas veins are situated superficially in the body tissues. Arteries becomes emptied when the person dies, whereas veins carries blood for some time after the death of the person. Now we will study about human heart. The heart is a muscular bag-like structure which is placed almost at the center of the thoracic cavity. The heart performs non-stop functioning throughout the life of an individual. The heart is made up of cardiac muscles which never undergo fatigue. The heart of human beings are divided into four chambers, 2 auricles and 2 ventricles. So there is no chance of mixing of pure blood and impure blood. Now we will study about the chambers of the heart. Auricles. The auricles of the heart are smaller chambers and they are present at the upper side of the heart. They have thin walls and they are known as the receiving chambers. Ventricles. The ventricles are known as the pumping chambers. They have thick walls and they are larger than the auricles. The wall that separates right auricle from left auricle is known as interauricular septum, and the wall that separates auricles from the ventricle is known as interauricular ventricular septum. Each auricle pumps the blood into the ventricles of their side at the same time. Right auricles pumps deoxygenated or impure blood into the right ventricle, whereas left auricle pumps oxygenated or pure blood into the left ventricle. Right auricle receives impure blood from the two major veins known as superior vena cava or precaval vein and inferior vena cava or postcaval vein, and this impure blood from right auricle is pumped into the right ventricle. There is a valve present between the right auricle and right ventricle. This valve is known as tricuspid valve because it has 3 cusps. Now we will see on the left side of the heart. Left auricle receives pure or oxygenated blood from 4 pulmonary veins, and from this left auricle the blood is pumped into the left ventricle by a valve known as bicuspid valve. This bicuspid valve is also known as mitral valve. This bicuspid valve is known as bicuspid because it consists of two cusps. These audioventricular valves, that is the tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve, both opens downward. Right auricles and left auricles contracts at the same time. When right auricle contracts, it pumps the impure blood into the pulmonary artery, which carries it to the lungs for purification. There is a valve present between the right ventricle and pulmonary artery, which is known as pulmonary valve or commonly known as semilunar valve because of their crescent shape. And on the left side, left ventricle contracts and pumps the pure blood into another artery known as aorta. There is a valve present between the aorta and the left ventricle, which is known as Iotic valve or Semilunar valve. These two semilunar valve, that is pulmonary valve and the aortic valve, these are also tricuspid, but they are mainly known as semilunar valve because of their shape. These two semilunar valves open upward, and from aorta the blood is pumped to various parts of the body. Now we will study about the mechanism of the function of the heart. Before studying the mechanism or functioning of the heart, we must know what is heartbeat. The pumping mechanism of the heart involves regular contraction and relaxation of the heart chambers. The contraction of the chambers of the heart is known as systole, and the relaxation of the heart is known as diastole. So one systole and one diastole of each chamber of the heart constitute one heartbeat. Normal heartbeat of a person is 72 times per minute. Heartbeat is originated by the muscular node, and this muscular node is present at the apex of the right auricle, which is known as SA node or sinoatrial node. This sinoatrial node generates electrical impulses and then it transmits it to AV node, audioventricular node, and from audioventricular node various parts of the heart. So this SA node is known as the natural pacemaker of the heart. If there is problem in generating impulses by this SA node, then artificial pacemaker is to be implanted in the heart. So it is clear that heartbeat is originated by the rhythmic contraction and relaxation of the heart chambers. Now we will study about the function of the heart. During each heartbeat, the chambers of the heart contracts or systole or relax or diastole in a regular coordination manner. This means that the two auricles contracts at the same time and the two ventricles contracts at the same time. When the auricles are in systole position, the ventricles are in diastole position, and when the ventricles are in systole position, the auricles are in diastole position. This systolic and diastolic position of the auricles and the ventricles occur simultaneously. That is, when auricles are in systole position, the ventricles are in diastole position, and when ventricles are in systole position, the auricles are in diastole position. These occurs simultaneously, and one diastole and one systole of each chamber of the heart constitute one heartbeat. Now we will study step by step about the working principle of the heart. First we will study about the right side of the heart, which includes right auricle, right ventricle and pulmonary artery. It deals with impure blood and it is known as pulmonary circulation. Now let's see what happens on the right side of a heart. When the right auricle is in diastole position, then it receives impure blood from two major veins known as superior vena cava or precaval vein or inferior vena cava or postcaval vein. Thus in diastolic position, the right auricle is filled with impure blood. Now it's time for auricle to contract. When this auricle contracts, the ventricle is in diastole position. So when the right auricle contracts, the volume of the auricle decreases and the pressure of the blood inside the auricle increases, and this opens the valve known as tricuspid valve, and now the impure blood from the right auricle is pushed into the right ventricle. Now it's time for right ventricle to contract and right auricle to be in diastole position. When right ventricle contracts, this tricuspid valve or audioventricular valve shuts or closes. So when right ventricle contracts, the blood is pumped into the pulmonary artery. After pumping the blood into pulmonary artery by the contraction of the right ventricle, the ventricle becomes in diastole position. At that time, this semilunar or pulmonary valve closes or shuts, to prevent the backflow of the blood from the pulmonary artery into the ventricles. So the blood in the pulmonary artery is transported to lungs for purification, and now the right auricle again becomes in diastole position to receive the impure blood and start the second cycle of the heartbeat. Now we will deal with the left side of the heart, which deals with the pure or oxygenated blood. The left auricle, when is in diastole position, it receives pure or oxygenated blood from 4 pulmonary veins. This brings pure or oxygenated blood from the lungs, and this left auricle then contracts. The contraction of this left auricle causes another aurioventricular valve to open, which is known as mitral or bicuspid valve, which is present at the junction of the left auricle and left ventricle. When the left auricle contracts, the pure blood is pushed into the left ventricle via this mitral or bicuspid valve. Then it is the turn of the left ventricle to contract. When the left ventricle contracts, this bicuspid valve closes. This bicuspid valve also opens downward, and thus due to the contraction of the left ventricle, the pressure inside the left ventricle increases, and thus due to the stronger jerk or kick of this left ventricle, it pushes the blood into the aorta. There is another valve present between the aorta and the left ventricle, which is known as Iotic Valve or Semilunar Valve. This semilunar or aortic valve also opens upward. When the ventricle becomes in diastole position, this semilunar or aortic valve closes. So the backflow of the blood from aorta to left ventricle is prevented. So we can see that the arterial or semilunar valve, like pulmonary valve and aortic valve, both opens upward, and hence this aortic or semilunar valve helps in flowing of the blood in one direction only. When the left ventricle is in diastole position, the left auricle again becomes in systolic position and receives the pure blood from pulmonary veins. In this way, the auricles becomes ready for the second cycle. We have to notice one thing, that both the right auricle and the left auricle contracts at the same times and sends their blood to the ventricles of their side through aurioventricular valves or tricuspid or bicuspid valve, which opens downward. When the ventricle contracts, then this aurioventricular valve or tricuspid and bicuspid valve closes and helps the blood to flow in one direction only. When both the right ventricle and left ventricle contracts, then the size of the ventricle decreases and it increases the pressure of the blood inside the ventricles, and then it pumps the blood into the artery of their own side. There are also valves present which opens upward and helps the blood to flow in the specific direction. After the contraction of the ventricles becomes in diastole or in relaxed position. Relaxed position means the returning of the chambers in its original size and is ready for the second cycle of the blood flow. As human beings have 4 chambers of heart, so there is no chance of mixing pure blood and impure blood. The pure blood is always present on the left side of the heart, which includes left auricle, left ventricle and aorta, and the pure blood is brought by 4 pulmonary veins from the lungs, and the right side of the heart deals always with the impure blood, which includes right auricle, right ventricle and pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery carries blood to the lungs for purification. In this way, the cycle continues throughout our life. Circulation of blood in lower vertebrates. In fishes, there are only 2 chambers, one auricle and one ventricle. So the heart always deals with impure blood, or it is called venous heart. The blood becomes purified or oxygenated only when it is pumped to the gills. Thus, the fishes have only single circulation of blood. In reptiles, there are 3 chambers of heart, 2 auricles and 1 ventricles, and so there is a chance of mixing of the pure and impure blood, and there is a poor development of the double circulation. In our next video, we will study about the blood pressure.